Hello there, and welcome to today's review. This time around, I'm taking a look back at a game from a series that I'm sure some of you are familiar with, Gears of War 4. I don't think the Gears of War series really needs an introduction at this point, so I'm not going to waste anybody's time and try to give one. All I'll say is that if you haven't played the original trilogy, which is kind of unlikely at this point, I think you should give it a go because they hold up a lot better than one might expect. That's enough about the past. Let's get to the present. Sort of. Gears of War 4 was released in 2016 for the Xbox One, the version I'll be reviewing, and for Microsoft Windows for those of you that prefer a little keyboard smashing. Before I get into the review, it's worth noting that I'm only going to be talking about the campaign today because my internet is less than adequate, so the online modes are pretty much off limits for me. Okay, now it's review time. I think it's important to start with what most people will be drawn to initially, the visuals. Graphics have never really been a make or break thing for me in games, but I'm happy to report that in this case, they're really good. The art style of the original games is preserved fantastically, but it's not too similar to the point that it just feels like a rerun. The next-gen hardware really helps this game to outshine its predecessors visually, with some truly breathtaking backdrops and settings to cause chaos in. I don't think the character models are quite as huge as they used to be though. Make of that what you will. And really that's all I can say about the graphics. The game looks great, and I don't think that's all that surprising at this point. Moving on to something slightly more controversial, the story. Quite frankly, this story is not going to blow you away or make you question the meaning of life or any of that bullshit. And honestly, I don't think you should expect it to. I mean, it's f***ing Gears of War, not Heavy Rain. With that said though, I think it's important for a AAA action title like this to have a story that at least keeps the player engaged and interested. If you've played the original trilogy, I think you'll automatically be at least somewhat interested in what the hell's going on. Gears of War 4 takes place 25 years after the events of Gears of War 3, which ended with the Locust seemingly being destroyed for good, though it doesn't take very long for this game to overwrite that happy ending. The plot centers around J.D. Phoenix, the son of Marcus and Anya, who fans may remember from the first few Gears games, and his buddies Del and Kate as they flee from the COG, who used to be the good guys, and end up uncovering a brand new enemy, the Swarm. To say that these guys are brand new is a bit misleading, I suppose, because they're pretty much just a new and improved version of the Locust, but I don't really want to waste anybody's time discussing the specifics. The main problem that I have with this game's plot is that instead of focusing on the cool stuff like the fact that the COG are bad and that there's a new enemy to contend with, these kind of things just take a back seat and you're forced to rescue dudes instead. First you rescue Marcus, and then spoiler alert, you don't rescue Kate's mom. I understand that they wanted to save some of this stuff for the sequel to expand upon, but I don't think they should have done so at this game's expense. Despite this though, I felt compelled to at least finish the game and see the story through. The intrigue is there, even if it could be executed better. Just like I said before, nothing here is going to blow you away story-wise, but it's good enough that you'll want to keep going and see it through. Now that I've thoroughly bored you with my critique of the story of this Gears of War game in which you chainsaw guys in half, let's talk about the chainsawing, or the gameplay. What I think you'll notice first upon booting up this game is that it plays incredibly similarly to the first few Gears games. Now this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I think they could have done more to spice things up. The core combat is pretty much entirely unchanged from how it has always been. There's a new execution move, and in some sections there's some cool environmental hazards that you can use to your advantage, but other than that, nothing else has really changed here. Luckily, the core combat is still as solid as ever. The cover system is still fantastic, and it might just be me, but the movement feels a lot less sluggish and restrictive than it did in prior games. Since the combat has always been pretty great in these games, I didn't find myself getting too disappointed with it. But I still think it would have been nice if they added in some new quirks and nuances, even if they were just relatively minor changes. The weapon variety is a little bit lacking here, mostly relying on weapons from the older games and their futuristic robot counterparts, but there are some highlights like the Buzzkill, which lets you fire a bunch of saw blades and chop dudes up. Generally, the weapons feel great and are fun to use, but sometimes it felt like the game was giving me weapons at really inopportune times. Like here, when it gave me the saw blade gun when there's a huge windstorm that makes it absolutely impossible to aim.
Over there!
Or here when it gave me this giant chain gun after all the enemies were already dead, so I just had to walk around super slow until I realized there was nothing to shoot with it. These aren't big issues though, and I think that the weapons will be satisfactory for most players, me included. One thing I really did appreciate in this game was the pacing. In games like this, it's really easy to get bored of shooting guys when that's the only thing you're doing. And that's not to say that this game doesn't include its fair share of shooting guys. It does. It's just that the segments are balanced dynamically with set pieces, cutscenes, and puzzles. This game has some great set pieces, like riding around on a motorbike that's actually a little too fast.
Are you coming fast?
And these seriously intense windstorms that create some really cool gameplay opportunities. Cutscenes also change the pace nicely. They're well directed and well written for the most part, and they're never too long or intrusive.
Well, shit.
The puzzles in this game aren't really what most people would think of as puzzles, as they mostly just involve shooting a certain thing or pressing a button, but they break up the pace pretty well anyways. Also, I might just be an idiot, but it seems like a lot of the time what you're supposed to do to solve a puzzle isn't always very well telegraphed. Like objectives will sometimes just blend into the background, and I swear blowing up this turret is f***ing impossible. Just look at me try with everyone yelling at me.
Launch the bombs at the turret!
Here we go! Come on! We gotta take out that turret!
God, I'm starting to feel like one of those game journalists everyone's always talking about. Despite my lackluster puzzle-solving skills, these different gameplay activities still help to make this game feel more like a game and less like a chore. Even the good pacing though doesn't make up for these lame defense segments. Like, there's a horde mode in this game for a reason. There's really no need to copy and paste it into the campaign on 3 different occasions, other than padding, I guess. And this wouldn't be terribly problematic if the segments were stylized in some way to at least differentiate them from the horde mode, but it's basically the exact same thing. It just doesn't strike me as something that this game needed. This brings me to perhaps my biggest issue with this game: the enemies. Since the COG are bad guys now, guess that means we have to shoot at them. So what that means is that for 2 of the game's 5 acts, you'll have to shoot at these generic robots. If the robots offered a unique challenge and maybe had a more interesting design, I might be okay with this. But to be honest, they just aren't as fun to fight as the Swarm, the game's other enemy. There's little robots, big robots, rolling robots, and flying robots, and they're all just like the Swarm and the Locust, except a lot lamer. I think the developers knew how lame this was too, because after these initial 2 acts, you only see the robots again one more time in the entire game. Luckily, things get a little more diverse when the Swarm are introduced as enemies. Yes, the Swarm are basically exactly the same as the Locust in the other games, but they've got a few new enemy types to switch things up, and honestly, I was just happy to not be fighting robots anymore. Some of the Swarm enemy types do suck though, like the f***ing pouncers. God, I hate these things. These guys will jump on you, and the only way you can get them off is by button mashing. On top of that, these f***ers are serious bullet sponges, and it looks like they have a weak spot on their stomach, but I'll be damned if I hit that thing a single time. These things show up in the campaign sickeningly often. God, they're just horrible. There's also these big dudes whose name I forgot, but they shoot shit out of their chest and can one-shot you, which means if they hit you once, you'll have to fight them all over again, which is just the opposite of fun. And to make things worse, these guys are even bigger bullet sponges than the pouncers are, which means you really, really don't want to have to restart this fight. Luckily, these guys don't show up quite as often as the pouncers do, but they shouldn't have been in the game in the first place. On a lighter note, I thought that the Snatchers were cool, and they kinda reminded me of the Antlion Guardians from Half-Life 2, and a similarity to Half-Life 2 is always a positive thing in my book. These guys will stomp on you or someone from your squad, meaning that you have to free them by shooting the Snatcher's weak spot. I thought this was a really cool mechanic, honestly. Good luck getting your AI companions to rescue you, though. In addition to the average enemies, there's also a few boss battles in this game, but unfortunately, they're nothing special. The only one that I would consider to be actually bad, though, is the fight against this crystal bastard and his pimple dog. Yes, you heard me right. Pimple dog. The crystal guy is set up to be some kind of antagonist, but you only see him twice in the entire game, and the second time he gets his face stomped. But not before you partake in the lamest and most tedious boss battle ever to get there. Seriously, who thought it would be fun to have to pull levers and shoot at a wall just to get the chance to damage this pizza-faced dick? Now it seems like I've been pretty hard on the combat in this game, but it's certainly far from bad, and if you like this kind of game, you'll almost certainly enjoy your time with the Gears of War 4 campaign. I did have a very positive experience with this game overall. It's just that the question for this review was, how does this game hold up? And I felt like it was important to mention the things that I found were lacking in this game, even though I had a great time with it for the most part. Since this is my first video, I've been trying to decide whether I should include some sort of rating system in these reviews, which I decided against it, but I think what I can do instead is just take a look at the Metacritic score of the game I'm reviewing and just tell you guys if I agree with it. So the Xbox One version of Gears of War 4 has an 84% on Metacritic, and that's a really good score. I guess critics liked this thing quite a bit when it came out, and for good reason too. It's a great game. Honestly, I would say that. But personally, I think I'd go a little bit lower score-wise, maybe like 70 to 80%. 84 seems a bit high for me, but that score certainly doesn't offend me. And that about wraps it up for my review of this game, but I did want to just kind of clarify some things since this is my first video. First of all, some of you may be wondering why I chose Gears of War 4, a game that came out almost 5 years ago, as my first review and my first video on this channel. And I don't really have a good answer for that. I mean, I picked the game up on eBay because I wanted to play it, because I haven't played it before prior to doing this review. I don't really have a good reason why I chose to do this game. I mean, I feel like it's kind of a good blend of, it didn't come out this year or last year, but it's still relatively new, because mostly what I'll be focusing on is kind of like Xbox 360, PS3 generation games, maybe even a little earlier, like original Xbox PS2 generation games, but I'll certainly be doing retrospectives on games that came out more recently. And with that said, I just kind of want to say thank you for watching. I mean, this is like I said quite a few times already, this is my first video, so it means a lot that you're watching this. If you did like it, it would mean a lot to me if you would subscribe to my channel, and leave a like if you liked the video. If you didn't like it, then obviously don't leave a like, or leave a comment. Tell me what I did right, tell me what I did wrong, tell me if you agree with my opinion on this game, or if you disagree. And if possible, It would mean a lot to me if you would share this video with some other people who you think would enjoy it. That is really a great way to grow this channel. I mean, because I'm starting off from nothing here. Other than that, thank you for watching. There's more coming soon, I can assure you. I already have another video in the works, so stay tuned. More is on the way, and thank you for watching once again.